For decades, he stood on stages across the world promising prosperity to anyone who would believe. He commanded the attention of 30,000 followers every Sunday. He flew in private jets, lived in multi-million-dollar mansions, and built an empire that stretched across continents. Pastor Creflo Dollar was untouchable, or so it seemed. The man who preached that faith could unlock unlimited wealth, that tithing guaranteed divine favor, that God wanted his people to live like kings. But today, that empire is crumbling, not from outside attacks, not from government investigations, but from something far more devastating. From the collapse of the very foundation he built his entire ministry upon. Right now, as you watch this, Creflo Dollar is facing consequences he never prepared his followers for. The doctrine that made him rich, that funded his lifestyle, that convinced millions to empty their bank accounts in faith, has been exposed as a lie, and he's the one who admitted it. After 36 years of preaching mandatory tithing, after publishing countless books and selling thousands of DVDs teaching that giving 10% of your income was a biblical requirement, after building a financial empire on that single message, Creflo Dollar walked onto his church stage and said 3 words that changed everything. "I was wrong." But this isn't a story about repentance. This isn't about a man seeking forgiveness and making things right. Because while Creflo Dollar admitted his teachings were incorrect, he refused to apologize. He kept his mansions, he kept his jets, he kept every dollar collected under teachings he now calls a great misunderstanding. And his followers, the people who sacrificed everything believing they were investing in divine promises, are left with nothing but broken dreams and empty bank accounts. Today, we're exposing the rise and fall of one of prosperity gospel's biggest names. How a man who started with 8 people in an elementary school cafeteria built a 30,000-member megachurch. How he convinced millions that God wanted them rich while he got richer. How scandals, arrests, and investigations chipped away at his credibility. And how one confession destroyed what decades of criticism couldn't touch. This is the devastating truth about Pastor Creflo Dollar. And fair warning, what you're about to discover will shake your faith in everything you thought you knew about modern Christianity. The Empire. How 8 people became a $70 million ministry. The story doesn't begin with scandal. It begins with something far more innocent. A dream that seemed almost noble at first. Creflo Augustus Dollar Jr. was born on January 28, 1962 in College Park, Georgia. His father was a police officer. His mother worked in an elementary school cafeteria, serving meals to children who would never imagine that one day her son would return to that same building to launch a movement that would change their community forever. Young Creflo didn't dream of being a pastor. He wanted to be a football star, a path that led him to West Georgia College in the early 1980s. He had talent, ambition, and the physical ability to potentially make it professionally. But one injury shattered those dreams completely. A single moment on the field ended the future he'd envisioned and forced him to confront a question most young men dread. If not this, then what? During recovery, he started attending Bible study sessions. Not because of any burning spiritual passion, but because he needed something, anything, to fill the emptiness that comes when your dreams die, before you're old enough to understand what loss really means. But something happened in those quiet rooms where people gathered to read Scripture. Something Dollar himself described as being born again. A transformation so complete that it redirected every ambition he'd ever held. He began leading his own Bible studies, small groups that met in dorm rooms and living rooms, gatherings that grew faster than anyone expected. Among the regular attendees was a young woman named Taffy Bolton, who would become not just his wife but his partner in building an empire that would span the globe. By 1984, Dollar had earned his degree in educational therapy and took a job at Bronner Psychiatric Institute, helping people with learning challenges. He was good at it, respected, making a decent living. But he couldn't shake the pull toward ministry, a calling that grew louder with every passing month. In 1986, Creflo Dollar made the decision that would define the rest of his life. He founded World Changers Ministries Christian Center in the cafeteria of Kathleen Mitchell Elementary School, the exact same place where his mother had served food for years, where he himself had been part of the school's first Black integration group decades earlier. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. A return to humble beginnings, a full-circle moment. 8 people attended that first service. 8 people sitting in plastic cafeteria chairs, listening to a young man preach with confidence that seemed to exceed his experience. But the message he delivered, simple, practical, focused on real-world application, resonated in ways traditional sermons didn't. He didn't preach fire and brimstone. He didn't focus on guilt and judgment. He preached hope, possibility, the idea that God wanted more for His people than just spiritual salvation. He wanted them to prosper here, now, in this life, and people hungry for that message came back. And they brought friends, and those friends brought families. The crowds grew so quickly that within months, the cafeteria couldn't hold everyone who wanted to hear this young preacher with the magnetic presence and the revolutionary message. By the late 1980s, Dollar had refined his core doctrine into something that would become both his greatest strength and his ultimate downfall. The prosperity gospel, the teaching that faith, combined with generous giving, especially tithing, could unlock financial abundance and personal success beyond imagination. To struggling families living paycheck to paycheck, it sounded like hope wrapped in Scripture. To believers searching for a second chance after bankruptcy or job loss, it felt like divine strategy handed down from heaven itself. And with every sermon, every broadcast, every promise of breakthrough, the crowds multiplied exponentially. In 1991, the ministry had grown so massive that Dollar renamed it World Changers Church International, a name that reflected the global reach he believed God had destined for him. Radio programs launched. Television shows followed, culminating in Changing Your World, a broadcast that brought his teachings into millions of homes across America and eventually around the world. By the mid-90s, Creflo Dollar was no longer a local pastor. He was an international televangelist with followers in Africa, Canada, India, Australia, and the United Kingdom. People who'd never set foot in Georgia sent money believing that financial miracles were finally within their reach if they just believed hard enough and gave generously enough. The World Dome, a massive 8,500-seat sanctuary completed in 1995 at a cost of nearly $20 million, symbolized Dollar's meteoric ascent. He insisted it was built without traditional bank financing, a testament, he told his congregation, to what faith and sacrificial giving could accomplish when people truly believed. By the mid-2000s, World Changers Church International reported over 30,000 active members and nearly $70 million in annual revenue, numbers that placed it among the largest and wealthiest megachurches in America. And Dollar's ambition didn't stop at Atlanta. He expanded aggressively, planting churches in New York City, Los Angeles, Toronto, Johannesburg, Houston, and Australia's Gold Coast. He announced a vision of 500 fellowship churches around the world, a spiritual empire that would touch every continent and transform millions of lives. His conferences filled arenas. His books became bestsellers. His face appeared on Christian television networks around the clock. Creflo Dollar had become exactly what he'd preached, living proof that faith produced abundance, that God rewarded believers with wealth beyond imagination. But beneath that momentum, beneath the cheering crowds and the growing bank accounts, there was tension building. A question that critics asked louder with each passing year. If God was blessing Pastor Dollar so abundantly, why did it look exactly like the congregation was funding his lifestyle? The more he preached prosperity, the more uncomfortable questions emerged about the wealth he personally accumulated from that message. Supporters saw him as living evidence that the doctrine worked. Skeptics saw something darker. A man whose lifestyle resembled corporate executives more than spiritual leaders, whose mansions and luxury cars seemed less like divine blessings and more like the profits of a perfectly legal but morally questionable business model. Still, the machine kept growing. Dollar believed with absolute certainty that he was building God's kingdom on earth. But others wondered if he was building something far more fragile. A structure held together not by divine power, but by the faith of people who desperately wanted to believe that prosperity was just one more tithe away. And that structure, impressive as it appeared, was about to face challenges that would test whether it was built on rock or sand. The scandals. When the foundation started cracking, as Creflo Dollar's ministry reached its peak, so did public scrutiny of the lifestyle he lived while preaching prosperity to people who could barely pay rent. The contrast became impossible to ignore. While the average household income in College Park hovered around $29,000 a year, Dollar lived in a Fayetteville, Georgia mansion, valued at $3.4 million. The estate sat on 182.5 acres, featuring a massive fountain, Olympic-sized pool, stone walls that seemed to stretch forever, and a private gated drive that kept the outside world at a comfortable distance. But that wasn't his only property. He owned a high-rise condominium in New York City's Time Warner Center. Purchased for $2.5 million and later sold for $3.75 million, netting a cool $1 million profit. There was another home in Demarest, New Jersey, estimated at over $2 million. His garage reportedly housed multiple Rolls-Royces, with at least one valued around $460,000. To his critics, these possessions represented obscene extravagance. To Dollar, they were simply evidence of God's blessing, proof that his teachings worked exactly as promised. Even his transportation reflected a lifestyle most pastors would consider excessive. Long before the jet scandal that would make international headlines, Dollar had been operating a Gulfstream G3, an aging aircraft that had already experienced multiple mechanical failures. One engine failed over the Pacific Ocean. Another incident involved a nose gear collapse during takeoff in London. Dollar defended the private jet by insisting commercial airlines didn't accommodate his ministry schedule, that he needed flexibility to reach believers around the world who were waiting for his message. But each of these assets, the homes, the cars, the planes, chipped away at his credibility with observers who couldn't reconcile luxury living with teachings about sacrifice and faith. Church watchdog organizations began raising red flags. Ministry Watch, an independent group that evaluates nonprofit transparency, repeatedly gave World Changers Church International an F rating for financial accountability, citing Dollar's consistent refusal to disclose basic audited financial records or salary information. Between 2007 and 2011, the United States Senate Finance Committee, led by Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa, investigated Dollar and 5 other prominent televangelists, questioning whether ministry funds were being diverted for personal gain and luxury purchases. The investigation asked uncomfortable questions. Were church-owned airplanes being used for family vacations? Were luxury homes purchased with donated funds? Were credit cards issued by the ministry being used for personal shopping? Dollar responded with defiance, refusing to turn over financial documents and arguing that the government had absolutely no constitutional authority to examine his private records or those of his ministry. Legally, his position was held. No charges were ever filed. The investigation concluded without definitive proof of wrongdoing, but reputationally, the damage was irreparable. For the first time, people who'd never questioned Pastor Dollar's integrity began wondering what he was hiding. Then came June 8, 2012, the night everything changed in ways no amount of money or influence could fix. At approximately 1 a.m., Fayette County Sheriff's deputies received a 911 call from Creflo Dollar's 15-year-old daughter. She told the operator that she and her father had gotten into a violent argument about whether she could attend a party that weekend. What happened next, according to police reports and witness statements, would become one of the most disturbing episodes in Dollar's public life. The teenage girl claimed her father had charged at her during the argument, grabbed her by the throat, choked her for several seconds, punched her, threw her to the ground, and hit her repeatedly with a shoe. A witness, Dollar's 19-year-old daughter, corroborated most of the story, telling deputies she'd seen her father grab her younger sister by the shoulders, slap her across the face, and choke her before throwing her to the floor. Medical examination revealed a scratch on the 15-year-old's neck, physical evidence that something violent had occurred. Dollar told a completely different story. He admitted wrestling his daughter to the floor and spanking her, but insisted it was only because she'd become disrespectful and had hit him first. He claimed he was simply trying to restrain an out-of-control teenager, that the scratch on her neck was eczema, not evidence of choking, and that the entire situation had been blown completely out of proportion. Officers arrested him anyway, charging him with misdemeanor simple battery and cruelty to children. He posted a $5,000 bond and was released within hours. Days later, Pastor Dollar stood before his congregation at World Changers Church International and addressed the allegations directly. He called them exaggerated, sensationalized, a misunderstanding twisted by the media, hungry for scandal. The crowd erupted in thunderous applause. Many members saw him as a victim of persecution, a righteous man being attacked by forces that couldn't understand godly discipline. Signs appeared outside the church reading, "We stand with Pastor Dollar." Supporters flooded social media defending his right as a father to discipline his children however he saw fit. But critics saw something entirely different. They saw a community so loyal to their leader that they were willing to dismiss credible allegations of child abuse. They saw a man whose charisma and authority had created an environment where questioning him felt like questioning God himself. The case dragged through the court system for months. Dollar completed an anger management program. Eventually, in January 2013, prosecutors dropped all charges without explanation. Legally, the matter was closed. Publicly, the questions lingered. What really happened that night? Why did Dollar's older daughter initially write a statement supporting her father's version, then change it when separated from her parents? Why were charges dropped despite physical evidence and multiple witness accounts? The answers never came. Dollar moved on, preaching as if nothing had happened. But for many observers, this incident revealed something troubling about the power dynamics within his ministry and his family. It showed a man who believed rules, even laws protecting children, didn't fully apply to him. Then, in March 2015, Creflo Dollar made a request so audacious, so tone-deaf, that it triggered international outrage and became the defining scandal of his career. He launched Project G650, a fundraising campaign asking supporters worldwide to help him purchase a Gulfstream G650 private jet worth $65 million. $65 million. The number alone was staggering. Dollar's ministry posted a nearly 6-minute video on their website explaining why this jet was absolutely necessary. His old Gulfstream G3 was unreliable and dangerous. His family had nearly died in the London incident. Commercial airlines didn't operate on God's schedule. And most importantly, Dollar claimed the new jet could transport 100,000 pounds of food and supplies for humanitarian missions around the world. The campaign asked 200,000 people globally to donate at least $300 each. Simple math that would cover the $65 million price tag. Almost immediately, aviation experts began pointing out glaring inconsistencies in Dollar's claims. The Gulfstream G650's actual baggage capacity was only around 2,500 pounds, nowhere near the 100,000 pounds his ministry advertised. The jet was designed for luxury executive transport, not humanitarian cargo missions. If Dollar truly wanted to move supplies efficiently, there were far cheaper aircraft specifically designed for that purpose. Social media exploded. News outlets around the world ran stories questioning how a pastor could ask struggling families for $300 to buy the most expensive private jet in existence. Even within the Christian community, prominent leaders spoke out. Gospel artist Kirk Franklin openly criticized the campaign, suggesting that such material excess indicated not abundance, but a shortage of character and spiritual priorities. The backlash was so intense, so immediate, that within days the fundraising webpage was quietly removed. But the Dollar didn't back down. In a sermon shortly after the controversy peaked, he addressed his congregation with defiance that seemed to energize his supporters while horrifying his critics. "If I want to believe in God for a $65 million plane, you cannot stop me," he declared to thunderous applause from the crowd. "I'm going to dream until Jesus comes. You can call it whatever you want, but I'm going to keep believing in God for big things." The congregation cheered. Outside those walls, millions watched in disbelief. The scandal reignited Senate concerns about financial accountability among televangelists. Although Dollar eventually acquired private jets through undisclosed means, the damage to his public image was catastrophic and permanent. To many observers, the jet symbolized everything wrong with the prosperity gospel. A pastor whose faith seemed measured entirely by his net worth, whose connection to divine blessing appeared directly proportional to his bank account balance, whose understanding of God's will perfectly aligned with his personal desires for luxury and comfort. The cracks in Creflo Dollar's foundation had widened into chasms, but the collapse wasn't complete, because the most devastating revelation was still coming. And it wouldn't come from critics or investigators. It would come from Creflo Dollar himself. The confession when the foundation completely collapsed. For more than 3 decades, Creflo Dollar had preached one message with absolute, unwavering certainty. Tithing wasn't optional. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a biblical command, a divine requirement that every believer had to obey if they wanted to experience God's prosperity. He taught that 10% of every dollar earned belonged to God and must be given to the local church. He wrote best-selling books about it. He produced DVDs and teaching series. He held conferences around the world where thousands paid to hear him explain the supernatural mathematics of tithing. "Give 10%, he promised, and God would open the windows of heaven and pour out blessings you couldn't contain." Millions believed him. Families living on tight budgets faithfully gave 10%, even when it meant choosing between medicine and groceries. Single mothers working 2 jobs sent checks believing their sacrifice would unlock divine provision. Retirees on fixed incomes wrote monthly checks, convinced that faithfulness to this principle would protect them. And Creflo Dollar became fabulously wealthy, while his followers waited for breakthroughs that never came. Then on June 26, 2022, everything changed. Pastor Creflo Dollar walked onto the stage at World Changers Church International to deliver a sermon titled, "The Great Misunderstanding." What happened in the next hour would shake the prosperity gospel to its core and leave millions questioning everything they'd believed. Dollar stood before his congregation, the same people who'd applauded through scandals and defended him through controversies, and said words almost no one expected to hear. "I want to start by saying that I'm still growing," he began, his voice carrying the familiar confidence that had built an empire. "And the teachings that I've shared in times past on the subject of tithing were not correct." The room fell silent. You could feel the confusion rippling through the sanctuary. "Today, I stand in humility to correct some things I've taught for years, and believed for years, but could never understand clearly, because I had not yet been confronted with the gospel of grace, which has made all the difference." Dollar then did something unprecedented. He told his congregation to throw away every book, every DVD, every teaching resource he had ever produced about tithing. Everything. Decades of material that had generated millions in revenue, that had formed the financial foundation of his entire ministry, was now, according to him, wrong. He explained that tithing belonged to Old Testament law, a covenant that Christians were no longer under. That New Testament believers lived under grace, not obligation. That giving should come from the heart, not from mandated percentages. That he had spent 36 years teaching error and leading people astray. The confession was stunning in its scope, but what came next was perhaps even more revealing. Dollar explicitly stated that he would not apologize for those teachings. "If I hadn't taught that," he explained, "I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't have learned this truth." It was a remarkable position. An admission of error without remorse. An acknowledgement of leading millions astray without any sense of responsibility for the consequences. He admitted he might lose friends, speaking engagements, and credibility over this revelation. But he seemed unconcerned, almost relieved to finally say what he claimed he'd been discovering for years. The response was immediate and divided. Some longtime followers felt liberated, finally released from the guilt and pressure of mandatory giving they'd struggled with for years. Others felt betrayed, angry that they'd sacrificed so much based on teachings their pastor now admitted were completely wrong. Outside World Changers Church International, the reaction was far more intense. Critics who'd spent decades warning about the prosperity gospel felt vindicated, but also furious. Where was the apology? Where was the accountability? Where was the restitution for people who'd given money they desperately needed based on false doctrines? Pastor Michael Clayton Harris of First Baptist Church of Passtown captured the sentiment of many when he posted on social media, "Until Creflo Dollar has a Zacchaeus spirit, which involves giving people a refund for all the tapes, videos, books, and materials they bought from him, I am not moved by his new revelation on tithing." The reference was to the biblical tax collector who, upon encountering Jesus, returned money he'd collected unjustly. But Dollar offered no refunds, no reparations, no financial transparency about how much money had been collected under teachings he now deemed incorrect. His luxury homes remained untouched. His Rolls Royces stayed in the garage. His private jets continued flying him to speaking engagements around the world. The empire built on mandatory tithing stood intact, while Dollar simply pivoted to a new message about grace and voluntary giving. Watchdog organizations pointed out that his ministry still lacked basic financial accountability. Ministry Watch continued giving World Changers Church International failing grades for transparency. Former members began sharing stories of being pressured to tithe even during financial hardship, of being told their struggles were the result of disobedience to this principle Dollar now admitted was wrong. Theological critics explained that Dollar's new position, while closer to truth, was still flawed. He claimed Jesus never taught tithing, but multiple passages show Jesus referencing the law, including tithing, as part of his teachings. Dollar's reversal proved what opponents had argued for years, that prosperity gospel was built on shaky theological foundations, selective scripture interpretation, and teachings designed more to fund ministries than to accurately represent biblical truth. The confession didn't destroy Creflo Dollar's ministry. His core followers remained loyal. World Changers Church International continues operating. Dollar still preaches regularly, but the revelation fundamentally changed how millions view him and the prosperity movement he represented. For 36 years, he promised that tithing unlocked divine favor. He taught that financial struggles meant spiritual disobedience. He convinced people to give sacrificially, based on promises he now admits were false. And he has never apologized, never acknowledged the harm caused, never offered to make things right with people who believed him and suffered because of it. The man who preached absolute certainty about God's financial laws has shown that his certainty was built on error. The pastor who promised prosperity to faithful givers has demonstrated that the only guaranteed prosperity in his system was his own. So here we stand, looking at the wreckage of what was once one of prosperity gospel's most powerful empires. Creflo Dollar rose from 8 people in a cafeteria to 30,000 members and $70 million in annual revenue. He built an international ministry that touched every continent. He lived a life of luxury most people only dream about. And he did it all by preaching one simple message: give 10%, and God will make you rich. Now he admits that message was wrong, that the foundation of his entire ministry, the core teaching that funded his lifestyle, that convinced millions to sacrifice money they desperately needed, was error from the beginning. But instead of apologizing, instead of making restitution, instead of showing the humility he claims to have found, Creflo Dollar has simply moved on. The mansions remain, the jets keep flying, the luxury continues. Only the message has changed, and that leaves us with devastating questions. How many people went without medical care because they faithfully tithed? How many families faced eviction because they gave their rent money believing Dollar's promises? How many marriages collapsed under financial pressure created by teachings that were completely wrong? How many people lost faith entirely when the breakthrough never came despite years of sacrificial giving? Creflo Dollar says he was wrong about tithing, but he won't say he's sorry. He says he's grown spiritually, but he won't acknowledge the people he hurt along the way. He says he's found the truth, but he won't address what should happen to the empire built on lies. The scandals, the arrest, the jets, the investigations, all of that damaged his reputation. But this confession might be the most devastating blow of all, because it came from his own mouth, because it admitted what critics had been saying for decades, because it proved that the prosperity he preached was real for him, but a mirage for everyone else. So here's my question for you. Should Pastor Creflo Dollar apologize for 36 years of wrong teaching? Should he return money collected under doctrines he now rejects? Or is simply admitting error enough? Comment below and let me know what you think. Do you believe his confession was genuine or just another way to stay relevant? If this story opened your eyes to the truth about prosperity gospel, hit that subscribe button right now. We're exposing the teachings that have damaged Christianity for decades. The pastors who got rich while their followers stayed poor. The doctrines that sound biblical but lead to destruction. The empires built on promises that never come true. Share this video with everyone you know. Let them know that just because someone preaches with confidence doesn't mean they're preaching truth. Let them know that the prosperity gospel has always been more about the prosperity of the preacher than the people in the pews. Let them know that Creflo Dollar's confession proves what critics have been saying all along. The devastating news for Pastor Creflo Dollar isn't coming from outside. It's coming from his own admission that everything he built was built on a mistake. And the people who paid the price for that mistake deserve better than a confession without an apology. They deserve justice. They deserve restitution. They deserve the truth. The empire is crumbling, the confession is out, and the prosperity gospel will never be the same.